products, but I wanted to set the scene first because it's really important to understand the context of marketing honey and some recent studies that have really shown the importance of local honey in the marketplace and the value of it. But you really need to understand the bigger context first. I think it's something everyone has a good awareness of, but I found an extraordinary set of graphs. And I'm a historian, I don't usually use graphs, I use words. So we're going to take you through 5 graphs to tell the story of contemporary honey marketing in the context. And we're also going to look at apiary management for production and establishing a market identity with your farm. So this is what we see when we go to the store. This was, it's a Price Chopper store. You see all this honey from all over the place. Some of it claims to be local. Some of it's US on the right there. And then more typically, you see honey from USA, Canada, Argentina, and India. What is the reason for all this? Where does this honey come from? What's behind it? On the surface, it should be a very good message for beekeepers and honey producers because Americans have been eating more and more honey for a long period of time. This graph takes us from 86 to the present, and it's a straight upward climb. People are eating more and more honey. And look at the honey price, that matches that climb going up. So it should be a good year, a good time to be a beekeeper and make a good living. But then things become much more complex. So if you look at the actual amount of honey production and the colonies and the yield of the colonies, it starts to paint a very different picture. You can see the top line is production, and that's going up and down. The amount of colonies has been declining, not radically, but gradually over time. And also what this graph doesn't say is the purpose of commercial bee colonies has changed dramatically over that same period. In '86, there were still a lot of large-scale honey producers that didn't do that much migratory beekeeping. And over time, the industry has shifted almost entirely, once you get to a certain scale, to migratory beekeeping for pollination purposes, and that honey has become a byproduct. So that's a significant shift in the marketplace. And the yield per colony has been bouncing up and down, but it remains pretty standard. And it's about 50 pounds per colony is what its weighted average is. Here, a small scale beekeeper can definitely do much better than that without much heavy management. You can get 75 or 100 pounds per colony, but it's somewhere in that range. So demand's going up, cost is going up, production and producers are flat to declining. So what's happening? So this is what's happening. So honey imports have risen dramatically. And you can see that the blue line stretching through that center is the US production, which again is up and down a little bit, but basically flat. And the balance, which is now greater than half, is from imported honey. And you look at the mixture of countries down below, and you have countries that are producing or importing large amounts of honey who have not been known historically as major honey producers. Vietnam, the Ukraine, India have never been major honey producers, but have suddenly become major honey exporters. So that graph becomes clear when we look at the next slide. And the global honey producers, where's that honey coming from? You see all the way over on the left. It doesn't appear on the other screens, but it's China. And China doesn't appear on the other screens because China was banned from importing honey both to the US and the European Union in the 2005-2010 period. And they were banned because they were adulterating honey and contaminating honey with all kinds of antibiotics and pesticides and other things. So what's happening? A lot of Chinese honey is making its way to the US market through transshipments, smuggling. They go into a dock on one country, go into a warehouse, go out the other side onto another ship. They're changed their label from China to Argentina or the Ukraine. And you can see this. This is really, there's an extraordinary figure here. If you're looking closely and look at the asterisk statement at the bottom, you see the Ukraine has production is the left axis. So they're producing, 100, but they're whatever that million pounds. However, look at that spike up. And the asterisk statement says chart scale does not permit accurate display of Ukraine's yield, which is reported as 59,279 pounds per colony. I thought that was a typo of some sort, but I checked it and I checked it against the text, and that is what the claim is. That's some Godzilla-sized bees producing honey, because we produce between 50 and 100 pounds per colony. So it was as clear as it's a documentation of transshipment from other producers. You can see, this is the label of a supermarket brand of honey, Argentina, Ukraine, and Vietnam. And, a lot of this comes from China. This is just a screenshot from Alibaba page. Alibaba is a fascinating website if you want to track adulterated honeys. This is premium citrus honey. You can buy it in the container load. You can buy it in the tanker load. You can buy it in individual bottles. It's going for about 50 cents to $1 a pound. The cost of production by big scale beekeepers in the US presently is around $4 a pound at scale. So clearly there is something going on. 3/4 of all honey, the earth has pesticides in it. Honey is one of the most faked foods in the world. The US government's not doing much to fix it, and that's true of most other governments. Honey, olive oil, and Parmesan cheese are the 3 most counterfeited foods in your grocery store today. Virtually all of it is adulterated with one non-food product or another. And honey is something that, is a kind of iconic product. So the question in my mind becomes, what's the opportunity in this? And is there, it's kind of dreary if you think about it, because you can't compete with 50 cents to $1 a pound Chinese honey that's being transshipped in. So the supermarket seems like it's, not going to be a good place to sell local honey or any honey. That's another reason why commercial beekeepers have switched to pollination, is they really can't make a decent living. They can't cover the cost of production on wholesale honeys. So the opportunity here is that people are aware of this. This is something that's generally out there in our society. And that there were 2 recent ag economic studies, one done by the University of Delaware and the other was the University of Wyoming, that studied consumer behaviors and did interviews and focus groups and various testings. And they came up with some very interesting findings. And both of them came that they really fit in with one another. One of which is that there's 2 predominant messages that people are hearing about honey in the marketplace. One is that the supermarket honey they're getting is not only not high quality, but it's often adulterated and may have things in it that they do not want. So they're aware of that problem, and therefore are searching out alternatives. The other is a positive message, which is that bees are an important part of our ecosystem, particularly our ag ecosystem, in providing food. That they're pollinators, they're important pollinators, that some crops like apples, almonds, and blueberries we really wouldn't have if we don't have honeybees. And that this is something that they value. Interestingly, when they came time to people put a monetary value to these 2 different ideas, the one that honey, in the supermarket, commercial marketplace is often of poor quality and sometimes has things they don't want in it. And the other is a positive message of buying honey is supportive of good practices, good ecological practices, and a sustainable living, they're the one they actually put their money to the road is the one that they want to have good honey that's not adulterated, that they react to that and purchase and value honey that's local, much more so than they react to the goodness, the positive part. They feel good, they react to them positively, but where it gets them to actually purchase and buy is this message that the honey is local, it's from a controlled source, that you can identify the beekeeper, you can identify or talk to the beekeeper about their practices and whether they do or do not use chemicals, what chemicals they use, what practices they use, what farms they visit, etc. And then packaging was also an important determinant in the willingness to pay a premium price. That they looked at it, and then just like any marketing person will tell you, your package is your advertising statement. It's your advertising statement, not just at the honey stand or the farm stand. It lives in people's shelves for as long as they have that honey, and it's speaking to them every time they use it. So it's an existing, a long-standing advertisement. So these studies both found that selling honey is effectively is a kind of a holistic practice. That those entities that have a coherent message, and we'll look at that in a little bit, that have the display materials, the labeling, websites or other social media that they might be familiar with you through, are very important to their decision to buy on the first level, and then also to be a repeat customer, come back again and again. And they found that consumers were willing to spend up to 25% more per container for local honey. That when faced with a choice, they really had no trouble paying a premium for local honey. And this was particularly true of consumers who use honey and bee products for health purposes. They have an increased willingness to support the cost of local honey. You may see this in your customers and farmers markets and farm stands and other places. Your regular customers have a strong level of support for sustainable growing practices and local economies. Interestingly, there's an age break in this, and it may just be the resources of age, but the older the consumer, the more likely they are to pay premium prices for honey. This was something that I found very interesting. One of the studies focused particularly on packaging, and they presented consumers with a choice of 5 different bottles. One being the Queen line, which is all my honey is packaged in Queen line bottles, the old classic honey. The other is the hexagonal little bottles that you see in honey supply catalogs. There's an oval teardrop, the bear, and the bale lid, which is kind of this like gifty looking item. They were much more willing to spend up to 15% on the fancier bottles. And the Queen line was just kind of the baseline. They were not willing to pay a premium over any other honey in that packaging. So the real strong message for me here is the importance of focusing on your appearance and your overall design and how it matches how you portray your farm or apiary operation. And also found, sometimes we think of the consumers at a farmer's market and other places as, oftentimes they're more highly educated, they're higher socioeconomic group, that there's a big difference between them and the general public. But the National Honey Board recently did a consumer study of 2 groups, one being the general public, just a blind market-driven cross-section of people, and the other what they're calling goodness seekers, which are kind of your classic customer at a farmer's market, of a highly educated person who values local foods and is willing to pay a premium for them, and that reflects other aspects of their life, and perhaps they're of a somewhat higher income level that's not a big a deal. But really, the difference between them is shrinking, and it's pretty small now in terms of their attitudes towards honey.
You still there, Garrett, or is it just my internet acting awful?
When I
There
first,
you are.
yes.
Okay, good. Probably my
Okay.
internet. Sorry.
Oh. Okay. So they're willing to pay. Both groups are willing to pay more, and also the purchase of honey tends to be a spur of the moment kind of thing. That the goodness seekers are planning it, but a lot of the general public will buy it more on the spur of the moment than others. And in both groups, the honey consumption again is going up, and the target is on local honey. So this is an opportunity. So let's talk about managing for production. So how do you manage what you're going to produce to maximize your income in this regard? So one thing that people are willing to do is pay more for not just local honey per se, but local honey with a very specific designation, either a farm identity or seasonal honeys. So the seasonal honeys you can grow, and this is to produce, and this is pretty easy to do in this environment, are spring honey. So you pull your supers in the last week of June and harvest that. Summer honey, July and August, autumn, September and October, and have them out and have them each display and be able to talk about what the characteristics of each are. And just like maple syrup, honeys change through the season by getting progressively darker with a progressively richer flavor. Also, they tend to kind of crystallize earlier as they get more in the fall honeys. If you are very motivated, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but you can also do varietal honeys. It's very tough to do in this environment because, as we know, we have a short growing season. It's compressed. Everything comes in at once. The classic honeys that that I really value here, that I've had very limited success in capturing, are basswood and locust honeys. They have about a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks in an extraordinary year blossom cycle. One strong rain will knock it out. Some years you get a lot of blossoms on the trees, some years very few, but they produce an extraordinary honey. Very light, very delicate flavor, very distinct from other honeys. Buckwheat, if there's buckwheat growing near you, very easy to produce, bees like it. And interestingly, our invasive species produce some very good honey. In Delaware County, Japanese knotweed is a tremendous problem. That's also true in Herkimer, where I am, and to a lesser extent in Otsego, but still, every stream side is filling up with this stuff. It produces a great honey. You can't tell bees where to go and not go. But it does produce a honey that carries a premium on the marketplace, as does purple loosestrife, which doesn't grow so much in this part of the world, but more down towards Hudson Valley and perhaps in southern Delaware County, you see it more. Local honey retail prices per pound start at about $8 or $9 and go up to 14 or 15. Depending upon whether you can do varietals, whether you can do seasonal honeys, whether you can do added value. And, part of this also is being able to explain to customers what the different types of honey are and having them available. Comb honey. Comb honey used to be many, many years ago a premium product. Again, because of adulteration, and we didn't really have the fine ways of testing for it, but people knew real honey came from comb. So a standard product of beekeepers for generations was comb honey in little basswood boxes. And they often packaged it with a little wooden fork and you'd eat it as confection by the side of the road. Less so today. People are kind of gotten out of the habit of eating comb honey. It's a little bit awkward. What do you do with that wax? Do you swallow it? You can, or you spit it out, which is what I do. And that's not what people generally like. But comb honey, raw honey, what raw honey means to people and be able to explain that is very important. Raw honey is honey that you're processing with minimal heat, just enough heat to get it to flow. So, 115 to 118 degrees is what the standard is. No hotter, because that leaves all the enzymes intact and all the other pollens and things that the bees brought in. So you're eating it as close to the bees' level of eating as possible. Now, crystallized honey is sometimes seen as a fault. If you sell into supermarkets and your honey starts to crystallize, you'll get a call from the store manager saying your honey's gone bad, you need to replace it. Even though it's not gone bad, it's just crystallized. Sometimes though, in some markets, people pay a premium for crystallized honey, such as what's called creamed honey in Europe, and it's sometimes produced here, which is you artificially stimulate the honey to crystallize by spreading very fine wax particles in it and mixing it up with a kind of high-speed mixer. And it produces this beautiful creamed honey, and it's a confection. Sometimes your honey naturally does that, particularly the early season. You want to contrast that against the ultra-filtered heated honey that comes in the supermarket. The honey that's always liquid has been heated to a very high degree, 140 degrees or higher, run through a succeeding layer of filters to filter out all the pollen. Now, that's often said, the honey marketers will tell you it's because it will crystallize if that doesn't happen. But they do it to such a degree to remove all the pollen that really what it seems like is they're trying to mask illegally imported honey, because you can quickly check the origin of a honey by the pollen in it. And if there's no pollen, you can't really check it. So it's a masking strategy for honey importers. I should also say that you should be careful about the term organic. When you use honey, you can use natural honey. When you bottle your honey, if you have anything else in it, you need to, like flavorings, you need to call it flavored honey. Organic honey has a very strict definition, and unless you are certified, it's illegal to use that term. And certification of organic honey is extremely difficult and generally only possible in areas of Brazil, Mexico, Hawaii, that you can isolate bee colonies from all other human activity by several miles. So in terms of how do you produce the honey, if you're going to do varietal honey, you need to scout out your local nectar sources years ahead. You need to know where that basswood grove is. And you need to pre-plan where you're going to put your hives and secure permissions from landowners. I'm assuming you don't own, a vast spread of land. Most people are kind of willing to do that if you share honey. They don't even usually, I've had people not care whether they got paid. They just wanted some samples of the honey. Before you place the honey, you need to pull your supers and get your colonies set before the blossoms peak. So you need to be aware of what the cycle of the year is when they're coming in, and keep an eye on them. Which, with trees, it's hard sometimes because the blossoms are up 20 feet in the air. Watch the blossom cycle. and it's especially if it's a rainy season, you need to, end your quest a little bit earlier, and observe when the bees are capping the honey stores. When they're capping it, that means it's ready, and you want to kind of pull it soon thereafter, because bees will mix different sources of honey. They do move honey around. So you can't leave it on all season. You have to pull it off pretty quickly. And because we're dealing with medication, depending, even if it's organic medication for mites and other things, you need to plan that around the blossom cycle. You should not have medication present in the hive when you are actively gathering, the bees are actively gathering a varietal honey source. And if you're managing for this type of honey, you'll probably be pulling honey more often than if you simply, like, basically I leave the honey on, I harvest it once a year. It's easy for me to leave the stores because I can make the judgment at that point how much they have and how much they need. But you're going to have to anticipate the 75 to 100 pounds of feed they will need to get through the winter. And you may need to feed them additional stores in the fall to ensure their survival. So some of the places that were identified as great venues, that this should be familiar to all of us who ever sell honey. But first of all, it's direct sales to the consumer through farm stands, farmers markets. Health food stores are another source. Surprisingly, I know a beekeeper who sells most of his honey through a hardware store. He has a friend with a hardware store owner, and it's right in the line of the cash register. And he says he has a steady supply that goes out through the year, and people know to get it there. And that's one of his prime spots. Other places is to kind of form retail partnerships with some of the people in your community who might be brewing beer, baking, or restaurants that might use your honey, and make sure that ask them to highlight the use of your honey in their products, because that's another way of kind of boosting awareness. And then to add display materials. Websites are critical. Websites don't sell a lot of honey directly. You're not going to get a lot of online sales, but people do go and check to learn about your hive, see pictures of your bees. So take a lot of photographs, put a lot of Instagram pictures up, and that's going to help build the awareness of your product. And tabletops. Your tabletop is your entree to the consumer. Don't just have stocks of honey there, have some photographs, talk about beekeeping. If you have a program where you bring in school children or work with different groups, have photographs of that so you can talk about that, because honey is a very direct connection to the local community, and people want to support that. So let's talk about other products that you can gather that are potentially income producing and also build that connection to the land. Bee pollen. Bee pollen is collected through a trap that goes on the front of your hive. The bees need to walk through it to get in and out, and it knocks the bee pollen off of their foraging leg and into a container. You obviously don't keep this on for great lengths of time because this is an important food source for them, but for a week or so at a time. And it will also, you can do seasonal pollens. People eat it as a dietary supplement. Some people put it on dessert products. Often it's in ingredients and health shakes. People generally eat it because, like local honey, it's believed to help with plant allergies, and it contains other vitamins, enzymes, and healthful components. If you're selling local pollen, it goes for about $10 or $12 for a little 8-ounce jar. So it's it's a niche market, but it can be quite profitable. Beeswax. Beeswax is a byproduct generally of beekeeping. It's for me, it's a lot of work to manage, to process it and render it and clean the wax. because unless it's fresh wax that year, it's always darker and sometimes there's bee parts in it and other things. You got to kind of clean it up. Can be made, made directly into candles and other craft items that you can do in the winter, or you can sell bulk cakes of it. It gets about $8 or $10 a pound for the bulk beeswax. As with honey and other products, the more you can do value added, the greater the perceived value is. So creating candles, it's a nice sideline. It's something to do in the winter time. You can take the caked wax and you can make it, and it keeps your house warm and also makes a nice scent in the house, and it will bring a greater price, because you might get $8 or $10 a pound for bulk beeswax, but you'll get $10, $15 a candle sometimes if you're artistic and you can do a nice unique candle product. Propolis. Propolis or bee glue is something that is, some people really value quite a bit. Propolis, when you're a beekeeper, can be a major annoyance, because if you're trying to take apart a beehive and you're dealing with the sticky stuff, but it's been used down through the centuries for a lot of different things. It's been used in wood varnishes by woodworkers and musical instrument makers. It's used for medical compounds, cosmetics. The one thing about propolis is it's extremely variable. It's variable by season, because it's the resins that the bees gather from the plants, and depending upon what they can get during different seasons. It's variable from hive to hive. Different bees seem to have a different preference for different types of propolis. And I've noticed even sometimes within a single hive, you'll start at one level and it'll be the sticky kind of gluey stuff, and then the other will be harder and varnishing. I don't know if that's an effect of age or what bees are particularly gathering. And the price and markets for propolis, they're everywhere. I mean, they sell like chipped propolis on Amazon and eBay. I don't know what you would do with that. Just like the scrapings from a hive tool. But again, in terms of value added, it's very easy to make a propolis tincture. Grain alcohol, which in college we called Everclear and went into some very illicit drinks that we had. Grain alcohol and propolis soaked in it kind of pulls the active ingredients out of it, and people use that as a health tonic. And that tincture, they go, I've seen them from $10 to $25 a small bottle. So that's another possibility. So some other considerations when selling honey and hive products is your bee operation. You really need to step up from, I extract in my basement, and when I'm done with it, my wife is beside herself because it's a sticky mess. I remember when we were a young family and we had 2 small kids, and we'd extract in the kitchen, and the kids wanted to get involved. And by the end of the day, you were kind of pulling them off the wall, like, because they were stuck to the wall with honey. So you need a space, about a 10 by 20 room. You really need to be able to get it up to temperature. So, because honey flows best when it's warm, so you want to be able to keep it warm. And you need the extraction equipment, and can be a significant investment. And storage and distribution. So what I want to do, because I'm coming close to the end, I'm going to, hopefully this link will work, is get us to some bee operations that have a very consistent, they're successful. This is Bright Raven Farm in Apiary. It's out near Ithaca. And they work on creating a very successful integrated message about who they are and what their products are. So a lot about them. They have a connection to Cornell in terms of the animal science part of it. Their honey You can see they have a very handsomely designed label. They sell it, they're getting $12 a pound. They do it by seasonal variety, and they also do it by
Garrett?
varieties. Yes.
Gary, we're not seeing that web page. You might have to share a different screen
Okay.
with us for
Well,
us to see that.
I anticipated that, so there, I took a
Perfect.
screenshot. So they have worked hard to create a very unified product package. Designs are integrated. They have a partnership with a small honey operation in Oaxaca, Mexico. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. So they sell their honey as well. They've also created packages. So these are very successful, and it depends on people's interests. So they can, have the Finger Lakes 3-season honey flight, which is apparently very successfully sold to tourists as souvenirs, gift packages for tea lovers, health folks, immune support, excuse me, not suppressant. And then raw honey gift set with candles. So they've packaged it, and it makes gift giving and buying much easier. And then they've also have an event space, which is their honey processing facility, which they can turn into a honey tasting place, a wedding venue, all kinds of different uses for this multi-purpose space. And then finally, so I encourage you, if you have the time, to go and look at this website, Bedu Honey from Oaxaca. What they have done very successfully in terms of integrating the message about the importance of local honey in comparison to world honey. They have several videos that document their practices and where their honey comes from and its purity, because they're in one of those places where they can genuinely produce organic honey without any contaminants from pesticides or other uses. So that was my last slide. So I see we're at 11:45. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions, folks? So this might be from the previous session. Did we address cutouts yet?
Yes.
Okay, so anything else, folks?
So Garrett, there is a question about propolis. What do you have to do to harvest propolis?
So, that's a very good question. Propolis, it's bee glue. It's the substance that bees use to hold their hive bodies together, seal entrance, seal any air leaks, and it's also something they use that creates a barrier against infection. It kills off diseases of various types. So to collect it, you can either just scrape it off with your hive tool, which is a very onerous practice because it's sticky like chewing gum that's been left out in the sun. Or you can buy a screen that goes into the hive and has a rough surface with holes in it, and that stimulates the bees see that, and they want to glue it up. So they'll cover that with propolis. You can simply pull that out. It's silicone, like the silicone you get for silicone mats in the kitchen. You put it in the freezer. It freezes, and when it gets hard and brittle, just like chewing gum, it snaps. So you take it out of the freezer and just flex it, and it will come off in chunks. That's the most effective way to harvest propolis. Years ago, I used to do a screen. You'd put a piece of window screen in a hive, and they would propolis that, and you would do a similar kind of thing with freezing it and flexing it, but it wasn't as effective as the silicone things that are available now and are relatively inexpensive.
Wendy, do you want to jump in with another plug for birdsong, just in case there was anyone who wasn't on before? That is interested in learning hands-on about beekeeping?
Yes, this program was excellent. I've got a lot of good ideas written down for things we could do at Birdsong.
I have a feeling you're going to be chatting with me about things we need to purchase, right?
Exactly.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's really fun to do stuff with the byproducts of the hive. I've done a little bit, but not nearly as much as I'd like to. And it's something to do in the off season, especially when you don't have to do that much in the hive. So some great ideas, I think.
Well, and there is so much interest in natural beauty products and
Right. Yeah, I've dabbled with that at home. It's very nice. So
The most successful, financially, the most successful thing I personally did was make bee lip balm with beeswax and olive oil or coconut oil and some natural extracts. Very easy to make. You buy little tubes and they sell like hotcakes.
I love that. I've made that too, and it's awesome.
Yes, it's very useful here in the North Country when the weather drops down to 5 below
my-
zero.
All my grandkids have beeswax lotion that we use for their eczema and all different injuries. I'm going to try the Propolis tincture this year for sure.
well, I've been saving 10 cans for you all winter, Wendy. So
Oh, good.
yeah.
Yes,
So-
I like that part on the discussion of the jars too. So
Yes.
get some more
It's,
fancy
a shame
jars.
about queen. Yeah, I think
Okay,
queen
it
line
does look
jars
like
would
we
just be.
are getting some questions. So if you plant pollinators on your land, does that take away from agricultural production from your neighbors? That's an excellent question.
So I guess the question is, are bees, are you using up the capacity of bees by planting pollinators? I don't think so. The bees are pretty effective workers, and it's pretty hard to saturate an area with bees. I've never seen decreased production. Here in this part of the world, everything comes in so richly, and the bees are busy all summer. I don't think that would be a problem.
And honestly,
And-
we
and-
have
and I-
so much knotweed. There's no way that
Yes.
anything you could plant could compete with that stuff.
And also the thing about planting plants that are good for pollinators is one of the major stressors of bees used for itinerant pollination is the idea that they're just eating monocrops. So they go from oranges and all they have is orange blossom, nectar and honey, nectar and pollen all the way up. It varies their diet, which I think is helpful for the bees.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of studies on planting pollinator pathways, and there's things that you can do to break up the monocultures, and it's really exciting, the studies that are coming out. So any more questions? We've got Garrett for a few more minutes. If you're a beginning beekeeper or someone who's been in the trade, Wendy,
A comment
Do you have
on
the-
that, a comment on that last thing about pollinators. I just read a study that when they put bees in to do squash, in a squash planting to pollinate the squash, they found that they only use 1 to 2% of the squash plants, and they go outside of that field to get more feed,
wow.
to get more things. So they studied, they looked in the hives and analyzed all the pollen and everything and found that there was only 1 to 2% from that squash field that they were utilizing.
Right. And actually, I read a similar study. This reminds me of the almond, because the almond crop is such a major pollination issue that 10 million some odd hives are sent out to California to pollinate almonds in California in February. That planting wildflowers alongside the pollen, the almond trees does not negatively impact the pollination services that the bees are doing for the almonds. And it is varying in their diet, so they're not totally stressed by having only one source of nectar and pollen in the hive.
Great. So Wendy, do you have anything to add about our marketing of honey this summer? I mean, it was, so just a little backstory. The owner of the community garden where we work is a big fan of the Grateful Dead, and he insisted on bear-shaped jars for the Grateful Dead bears. And Wendy, do you think that was and we were marketing it next to another farmer who was selling a similar product, and we actually marked it up because of the jar. Do you think that was a good strategy or no?
I think so. I mean, we just heard from Garrett that they're willing to pay for the fancier jars. And I think part of our problem was we didn't start selling soon enough. But because it was first year highs, we didn't get much spring honey. We got mostly fall with the knotweed.
Mhm.
So next year, hopefully we'll get spring and can start marketing it much sooner.
Mhm. And so would you go back to bear jars or?
I would be happy with some bear jars. Yeah, I was surprised he didn't get them the second time around. He got the
Who
little
knows
ones.
them, but yeah. Yeah.
I'm still just, I'm more accustomed to the 1 and 2 pound standard jar, but it's fun to do some other ones. And
As Gary
actually,
said,
Carla's
kind of
daughter
is,
marketed our tiny 8-ounce jars very well at the market. So they sold very well.
excellent. Well, we're looking forward to a great honey season coming up. And Garrett, if you want to drop your email address in the slideshow, and Wendy, not in the slideshow, in the Zoom, and Wendy as well, hopefully folks can get in touch with you. And we are really working on trying to do some more regional meetings, get-togethers, in-person trainings. And any of your feedback is so welcome as far as what you would like to see us do for you. We are here. Okay, Garrett got his.
Great. And there's my email. Please feel free to contact me. We'll get a set of the slides up and some other resources for you to draw down the next day or so.